So here we are now, ladies, and we're moving on from playing about with paper to working with fabric. So you should have these two templates, and you should have by now cut out all your pieces. I think you need 8 pieces as your smaller point piece, and these are the ones that form the background on the circle. I've chosen to do that the same as my main background fabric, so that that'll kind of blend in, but you could do it in another fabric if you wanted to. So to make each of the component pieces, you need to take one of your wedge shapes, and you need one of these ones, one of your points, the smaller points, and 2 of this kind of wedge shape piece. And we start off with this one. I'm going to flip this over to the ironing board side that I've got here, and put your point piece face down with the small pointy part upwards, and then you're going to lay this on top so that this section here, this pointed section, sits kind of within that and giving you about a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And then you take your freezer paper is shiny side down. It's not looking quite so shiny now. I've ironed it a couple of times, but shiny side down, and you press that into place with your iron so that it sticks to the piece of fabric. So there we go. So we've got that piece there. So that's the first part. Now we flip it over to the other side, and we take one of the wedge shapes. Now, because this is a cream on cream, I need to just check carefully which that I'm going the right way. So I've got that. So that's right side. So you're doing right sides together, and you line up one of these wedge shapes, making sure that it's sticking out both bits here. And I'm just going to put a pin in quite a long way away from where the seam is, because we're going to stitch down this seam but from the other side. So just put a pin in there just to hold that roughly in place, and then I'm going to flip it over to this side, and I'm going to stitch down this line. So just make sure that you get your stitching fairly accurately down the line. If I can find the foot on my machine. There we go. So just take your time stitching right down the line here so that you get it nice and accurate down to the point. Just trim off the threads. Can remove the pin, and then we're going to go back over there and flip that piece back. And there we are going to press that so that it sticks to the freezer paper on that side. So watch you don't get the iron on this bit. So just carefully press that to the side. And I tell you what else I'm going to do is, you can see the dark bit there. So what I'm going to do there is I'm just going to flip that back, turn that over, and I've got a wee ruler. Do you remember how we did this on foundation piecing before? We trimmed the background pieces and the seams, and it just gives you a neater finish. So I'm just going to trim that extra bit away. And then I'll just press it back again so that that's sticking to the freezer paper. Don't worry if it's not completely stuck, it'll be fine. It just helps you with the piecing. So, and then we're going to go back. Oh no, we're not. We're going to stay on this side, and we're going to take the other wedge. And again, I'm just going to check which is, that's the right side. So right sides together, and then you're going to line this up with this side of the seam here. Just making sure that everything's covered. And a wee pin in there. Flip it back to this side, and we'll stitch this seam. Again, just try and be as accurate as you can with the seams. I'm just manually turning my needle down so that it's right almost at the point of the seam before I start stitching, and that way I get a better finish. And just take your time up these seams just to get them nice and accurate. pop your pin out. And again, if you think that needs a little bit of trimming, it's worthwhile doing that just to get them nice and neat, especially if you're using a light fabric and a dark fabric. You don't really want them kind of the dark fabric shining through the light one. So and then we've got a nice wedge shape, and I'm just pressing that down so that I get the freezer paper to stick. And then once you've done that, you turn it back. Oh, that's not stuck very well, has it? Sometimes it's better if you press it from the paper side, it sticks better. Right, that's it. Now this is really important. You're going to trim a 1/4 inch seam all around this complete wedge shape, not the inside parts, but around the outside of the wedge shape. So that's down this part. I'm going to trim off and leave a 1/4 inch seam there. Down this side. This is a 1/4 inch from the edge of where your freezer paper is, so that you've got a 1/4 inch sticking out. And then on this part, you have to do that by hand. I've just been making a couple of marks at the 1/4 inch so that I'm getting it relatively accurate. This bit should be round about a 1/4 inch. So I've just been putting a couple of wee marks in there and just cutting it round by hand so that I'm getting a, doesn't have to be bang on because this is just your seam allowance, but just so you've got a nice wedge shape following, and then you've got the seam allowance around the outside of the paper wedge shape. So you end up with shapes like that, and these are going to form the wedges that you've already looked at.